friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's new Spring Basket stamp set. I've stamped the images I'll be using in Crunchy Leaf ink, and I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the new Bitsy Blooms 6x6 pad. So I'm going to tear out the sheet that I want to use as my inspiration and tuck that under my cardstock panel. So I'm coloring with my Copic markers, and I am going to start with an undercoat for the little bunny using W00 and W1. And that is just because I want to do some little patches on him, and I want to have the white areas already shaded. It's just easier to do it first and then color over him with the patches. So I'm just adding a little bit of that W1, blending out with the W00, and then I'll use my colorless blender to help transition into the plain white cardstock. Then for the browns, I'm going to use E30, E31, and E33. So I'm going to start with the E33, and I'll add a patch on the top of his head over toward the left. I'll add a couple of little spots on his right ear, and then I'll also bring some of that brown down his back and onto his forearm. And then I'll start blending that out with the E31, just softening that a bit and dragging that darkest color into the mid-tone. Then I'll come in with the E30 and just pull that color out even more. I want to cover one of his eyes with that brown patch. Then I'm going to start doing a second layer on this guy just to increase that saturation a bit. And this time I'm also going to color in his little foot. I just decided that I wanted that to be brown so it would stand out from his tail. I like to start a little softer with my coloring when I have images stamped in this Crunchy Leaf ink, since it is a lighter brown shade or like a medium brown, and then just build my color if I want to go darker. So I am going to smooth out the E30 with the E000 and let that fade into the warm grays that I had already laid down. Then I'll add in some rosy cheeks and color the insides of the ears and the little nose using R00, R21, and R22. So I filled in the nose with the R22, kind of softened it with the R21, but I did use all three shades on the cheeks and the inner ears. Then I'm going to bring in some yellows to match that pattern paper, and I'm going to go pretty pale. I'm using Y000, Y11, and Y13, and I'm going to do my butterflies with this combo and also the petals of my daffodils. So I'm starting with the Y13 closest to the body on the butterflies, and then blending out toward the tip of the wings. And then for the petals of the flowers, I'm going to place that color closest to that little cup part of the daffodil, and then blend out toward the tip of the flowers with the lighter shades. Then for that center part, I'm going to go a bit darker with Y15 and Y17, just the two shades since it's such a small little area there. And I didn't want to go too dark, but it does match the centers of the flowers on that pattern paper. Then for the leaves, I'm going to use YG01 and YG07. I'm adding a little line of that YG07 first, and then I'm going to blend that out with the YG01, which is quite a bit lighter, but because I'm coloring in such a small little area, they will blend fairly well together. Then for the basket, I wanted to go fairly light, not too dark. I did bring in the E44, which is going to be my darkest, and then I added to that E42 and E43. So I'm going to do my shadows first on the outer edges of the basket and also at the base of the handle. And then I'll start working my way in toward the center of the basket with the E43, making sure to go over the edge of that E44 so that everything looks nice and smooth, and just drag that color up. I'll do the same with the handles, and my E43 started to leak on me, so I just took off the other cap to equalize that pressure. Thankfully I caught that right away, so it's going to be easy enough to clean up. And I will continue coloring now with that E42 and just fill in the rest of that basket and the rest of the handle. So I'm just going to let that little blob dry, and then I'll come back to that in a minute. In the meantime, I am going to do a second layer of that E44 and just darken that up a little bit on the edges, and also just smooth out the blend with the E43 next. And I will then come in with that colorless blender and just clean up that little blob between the bunny's ear and the basket handle. Then for the little lace trim that's hanging over the edge of the basket, I went with E40 and E41, so it still matches, but is just a little bit lighter to provide some contrast. And then for the bow, I decided to go with more of a minty green. So I'm going to use G00 and YG41 and just add that darkest color, the YG41, where the fabric is gathered, and then blend out with the G00 to the edges. And then I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I'm going to trim that down with the second largest of the large stitched circle stackables. And I am going to watercolor a very simple background onto this panel. So I'm going to use some Distress Oxide inks, starting with Salvage Patina for the sky. I'll add a little bit of water to that and mix it up to make it a little bit more fluid. And then I'm going to paint that onto this circle with a number 2 round paintbrush. And I am purposely leaving some areas where there is a little bit more pigment and then softening it in others just to make it look a little bit more organic and flowy. And then I'm going to bring in some Twisted Citron for the grass down at the bottom. And I am staying away from the white edges. I wanted to leave those so it has a little bit of a frame to it. I did mix a little bit of the Salvage Patina and Twisted Citron together to form another shade of green to kind of transition between the two shades, and just kind of cleaned up those edges, added a little bit more color here and there, and then I'll set this panel aside to dry. Once it has, I will pop that in my Misty and just make sure that that is well pressed down, since it did warp just a tiny bit from the watercolor. I'm stamping a sentiment from the Carrot 'Bout You banner ad on, and I'm doing that in Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink because I'm stamping over Distress Oxide inks already, and so I needed something that was a little bit more opaque, and I didn't want to use VersaFine Onyx Black, which I normally do because my stamping on the outside is in brown, so I went with the Vintage Photo. And then for the inside, I am using Sunflower ink, and I'm using the image from the Spring Basket stamp set, but the sentiment is from the Carrot 'Bout You stamp set. And I'm going to stamp that down a couple of times to make sure it's nice and bold, since this ink does dry back a bit. So then I'm going to go back to my Bitsy Blooms 6x6 pad, and I am going to tear out the coordinating plaid print in this pale yellow. I think the floral and the plaid just go so well together. So I'm going to trim these down with my paper trimmer. And I just eyeballed it, but I did measure afterwards, and each strip is about 4 1/8 inches by 1 3/4 inches. Mine are not exact because I just kind of was winging it, but that's the closest measurement I could get to. So I'm going to do the floral prints down at the top and the bottom, and I'm gluing that to my sticky note card base. And then I'm going to add the plaid print in the center between those two. Then I'm going to bring in my focal panel. I've added some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back of that to give it some dimension on the card. So I'll peel off those release papers and center that on the plaid print. and just press that down into place, and then I can bring in my images. I'm going to start with the largest image, which is the bunny with the basket, and I'll add some liquid glue to the back of that. I'm not going to add liquid glue right to the top of the basket because I need to be able to tuck those daffodils down inside. So I'm just going to get that situated down toward the bottom, and then I'll add some liquid glue to the back of the daffodils and just slide that into place. And I really love that that stamp set gives us so many different options of things to put in that basket, but I wanted to go for the daffodils because they just scream spring to me. I added the little bow over on the right hand side of the handle, and then I'm going to add one butterfly on the right and one on the left. For a little extra sparkle, I decided to add some clear sequins. I'm going to do 3 up in the top left corner, 1 larger and 2 small, and then 3 down in the bottom right. Same formation, just a little bit different situated on the card. And then I'll bring in some Stardust stickles to fill in the centers of those sequins. And I will also add a little bit to my butterfly's wings and the bow on the basket. And I ended up making 2 cards with this design since I had extra pattern paper once I was done. So I'm going to show you guys that in just a second. So there's an up close look at this card and another peek at the inside. And now I will bring in the second card, which is pretty much the same. It just has the plaid paper at the top and the bottom and the floral in the center. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. The products I use will all be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.